It is day 3 now in the Vallow Daybell murder trial in Idaho, and the court appears to be inching closer towards seating a jury in this case, looking to narrow down around 1,800 potential jurors to 12 with 6 alternates. And they have identified 30 potential jurors out of 42, which will then be whittled down to 18 people. Vallow is accused of killing her 2 children and conspiring to kill her husband's late wife. This has been called the Doomsday Trial because of Vallow's obsession with the end of the world and her alleged belief that her 2 kids were zombies. The trial is expected to last up to 2 months. There will not be cameras allowed in the courtroom, but we're following this case very closely. Joined this morning by Joshua Ritter, get some more perspective on what we can expect in the jury selection process and what's next in the case. He's a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor and also host of the True Crime Daily Sidebar podcast. Josh, thanks for being with us. The grandparents of J.J. Vallow right now are fighting to be inside the courtroom. They want to watch this trial unfold. They have a vested interest for obvious reasons. They spoke to my colleague Ashley Banfield this week about the case. I want folks at home to hear what they had to say, and then we'll chat about that.
Has the prosecution suggested to you that you might be called first? And then it doesn't matter what Lori wants, because once you've testified, you can be in the courtroom and you can just stick it to her.
You know, this case has been so emotionally hard on Kay and I. And these rulings by Boyce is it's upsetting to us. But, you know, I have to believe in justice. And that's our only hope. You know, if we can't be in court, which I don't understand why we couldn't be in court.
So, Joshua, I don't understand that either. I mean, when does a defendant get to say who and who is not in court in this case or others? Explain that.
Yeah, well, it's confusing if what they're talking about is the judge not allowing them court for the jury selection process, because that would be something that's open to court and open to anyone. There is a thing called a motion to exclude involving witnesses who may testify, and you can understand that you don't want potential witnesses being able to hear other testimonies so that they might change their testimony when it comes their time to actually take the stand. So that would be understandable, and that's why, you know, it might be in the benefit of the prosecutors to call these witnesses first so that they are done with their testimony and then they can have the opportunity to sit in the courtroom. But it is frustrating, and it's also interesting because it continues to add to how this judge has been handling this case, with not allowing cameras in the courtroom, only allowing audio, but that audio is released at a later time. He's being very protective of the proceedings.
Well, and that just makes me curious about, you know, what is allowed and isn't in case-by-case basis. You and I talked about the Murdaugh murder trial in South Carolina and what was happening inside that courtroom. And there were witnesses who testified on that stand who were in court. I mean, the most prominent one was probably Buster Murdaugh. So we've seen it happen before. I mean, these grandparents want to be in there for their vested interest. Their grandson is dead. Any chance that the judge will change their mind on this, that the state might have some weight?
Yeah, Murdaugh was an interesting case because you're absolutely right. We saw Buster in court every single day before he testified, which was surprising to me. So I don't know, maybe the defense didn't have a problem in that case because they were going to call him as their own witness and the prosecution didn't take issue with it. But if the defense has raised an objection in this case, I can't see the judge, with the magnitude of the case that we have involved here, with the fact that she's on trial for several murders, I can't see the judge really deferring to the prosecution in this type of an instance when it involves kind of protecting the sanctity of testimony.
Okay, so let's talk about jury selection for a moment and what types of people the defense and the prosecution is going to be looking to seat in this case. It's high profile. The news about this case has been out for a while. And just like the Murdaugh trial, it's really complicated. You've got the death of the 2 kids, their murders, but then you've got some other subsequent deaths that also happened, former husbands and wives and brothers. I mean, it gets pretty messy. And then you add in the factor that the doomsday mom and the zombie-like comments that she made about her kids. How do you question a jury? First of all, what's the defense want to see in a jury, in a juror?
Yeah, a lot going on here. I think the defense, and they've made these motions already, they're primarily concerned with finding people who don't have preconceived notions of this case, which is difficult in that community considering the amount of media attention it has got. But the other thing that I think is going to play a huge role in this case is her mental health. We know that at one point she was already declared unfit to stand trial. That halted proceedings for some time. Idaho does not have a traditional insanity defense, but her mental health can play a role when we're talking about whether or not she was premeditated. This is first-degree murder, so her mental state is at issue. Her mens rea will play a role in this, and they can attack that by saying that she suffered from mental health. So I imagine in voir dire, they're going to ask questions of jurors of how they respond to that. What do they think about that? What do they think about somebody's religious beliefs? All of those things, I think, are going to play a big role in the defense.
And the kids were found in a shallow grave. Do we know much more about the evidence that the prosecution has in this case?
You know, the prosecution has been a little guarded with what they've shared with the media. We know that the tragic events of how these children were found, but I think what's going to be a large part of the prosecution case is kind of the evolution of Lori Vallow, of how she, started out as a mother with 2 children and then slowly began to fall under this kind of cult-like control of Chad Daybell, and how he began to convince her of these beliefs that doomsday was coming and that her children were possessed and they were zombies, and being able to kind of flesh that all out for the jury to understand and wrap their heads around how someone could commit such a heinous crime of taking the life of their own children.
Well, and the defense is going to rebut anything the prosecution does with the alibi that they say she has when her kids were killed.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Again, in order for her to be found guilty, it could be that she just conspired in this and didn't actually play a role directly in their deaths. And I don't know if that alibi will hold up under that, but that is certainly going to be a part of the case that the defense will heavily try to push to the jurors.
The other thing, Joshua, and what do you think about this? This could be the wild card, but we're hearing that the defense could try to pin the kids' deaths, their murders, on Lori's brother, who is dead, cannot defend himself. Smart strategy?
Yeah, I thought they would try to pin the death on Chad as well. He's not going to be in the courtroom. The case has been severed, so he's not there to defend himself. Listen, the defense is going to have to point it at someone else. This isn't going to be a case of it's going to be a case of who did it for the defense, not so much what is it. I mean, this is obviously a first-degree murder, so they're going to have to somehow present to the jurors a bad person, someone to hang their hats on here. If it's not their client, they're going to have to present to them someone who's responsible for these murders.
And real quick, the death penalty taken off the table in Lori Vallow's case, will that have an impact here on the jury, the judge?
It will. First of all, the case is going to move a lot faster. The jury selection process is going to move a lot faster. And because you won't have to find what's called a death qualified jury, you're not going to have jurors who are able to say that if they find that the facts and circumstances are appropriate, they would vote for death. That's what you get in a death qualified jury. And those are usually people who lean a little more conservative, who lean a little more pro law enforcement. So you won't have that element here. So to some extent, putting aside the fact that you won't be looking at the death penalty, the jury selection process itself will tend to be a little more favorable to the defense. Maybe not favorable, but a little more even-handed, in that the prosecution won't have that advantage.
What a tragic case. Thinking about those grandparents right now. Joshua Ritter, attorney and also host of True Crime Daily Sidebar podcast. Always good to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.